My guest at this time is Andrew Arthur. He's a resident fellow in law and policy at the Center for Immigration Studies. Few people know immigration law as well as Art does, and today we want to get his insights into what the appropriate legal response is for the United States when thousands of Central American migrants reach our southern border. And Art, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, obviously, there are legal ways and illegal ways to get into this country, either through the normal immigration process or to seek asylum or refugee status. But when this group of hundreds, and I guess now thousands, gets here, how does the law say they should be treated? What's supposed to happen?
Well, what's supposed to happen is that they enter legally through the ports of entry without proper documents, or illegally between the ports of entry, that is, over the border without documents. They're supposed to be placed into expedited removal proceedings. Expedited removal allows a DHS official to order the removal of an alien without having to present that alien to an immigration judge or put that alien through removal proceedings. However, if any of these individuals assert that they have a credible fear of persecution, if they say the word persecution or torture or asylum, then they'll be referred over to an asylum officer with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. That asylum officer will give them an interview and determine whether or not they actually do have a credible fear of persecution. This is a lower standard than the well-founded fear requirement for asylum relief. It's more of a screening standard than anything else. If they pass the credible fear test, and about 75 to 90% of all aliens who claim credible fear are found to have a positive credible fear, or receive a positive credible fear finding, they will then be placed into removal proceedings and allowed to pursue an asylum claim before an immigration judge, a Department of Justice attorney, and the Executive Office for Immigration Review in removal proceedings.
So, Art, some people are confused because the DHS Secretary, Kirstjen Nielsen, said these people aren't going to be allowed to stay unless there are special circumstances, perhaps, for some of them. And so some people responded to that by saying, what do you mean stay? Why do they get to come in? But as you just explained, they do get to at least cross the line in order to be expedited for removal or to be adjudicated based on their request for asylum. So what do you say to those who are scratching their heads about why they get to enter the door at all?
Well, the expedited removal process was originally intended to be a shortcut to the removal of individuals who didn't have visas. Imagine, landing in Heathrow and you don't have a visa to be in the UK. The UK is probably just going to put you on the next flight out. That's probably the best way to think about it. But in this particular instance, credible fear was a procedure that was put into the law when it was passed back in 1996 to make sure that we were in compliance with the 1967 protocol to the 1951 Refugee Convention. Unfortunately, what had been a very minor process has become a huge flood of individuals. 10 years ago, we received about 5,000 credible fear claims. Today, we've received tens of thousands of credible fear claims, and it is a growth industry. In fact, we're actually seeing huge numbers of families, mothers and fathers or fathers with children or purported children crossing the border in order to claim credible fear and remain in the United States. And they do that for a very simple reason. Under the Flores Settlement Agreement, which was entered into between the Department of Justice and a class of alien minors back in 1997, alien minors who are detained by DHS are to be released within 20 days, and that includes alien minors who show up with their families as well as unaccompanied alien children. For that reason, the U.S. government faces a quandary. We can either release the child and separate the family, or release the family as a whole. And of late, the United States government has taken to releasing the family as a whole, which is why we get so many people. They want to come and live in the United States, and basically by coming with their children, they're able to do that. So, quite frankly, again, what was supposed to be just a slight twist to the law has actually overcome the law itself. It's the exception that has swallowed the rule.
We're talking with Art Arthur, resident fellow in law and policy at the Center for Immigration Studies. And Art, if you can, you mentioned that the vast majority, somewhere around 80% of people who claim credible fear are found to have a positive claim of credible fear. And part of this kind of goes back to the big controversy with President Trump and how he described certain countries where we allow people in from. I think it was Haiti, maybe some in Africa at the time. And I think Honduras may have also been part of the discussion as well, which is where a lot of these folks are coming from. It's got one of the highest murder rates in the world, if not the highest. And so you can have pretty much a vast majority of the population credibly claiming fear. So how do you determine who of this massive populace has a legitimate claim and who doesn't, or do they all have one?
Well, actually, most of them don't. In order to have a credible fear of persecution, you have to show a fear of harm on account of your race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. 4 of those are pretty straightforward. The 5th, membership in a particular social group, is wide open and it can include any group of 2 or more people, as Justice Alito noted back when he was a judge on the Third Circuit. And for that reason, people have made any number of different claims. In a case called Matter of AB, the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, attempted to limit the number of those claims that are available, basically saying that if you've been the victim of common crime, that you don't actually have a persecution claim. It's putting it a little bit more simply than he did, but that's more or less the gist of it. I often hear this, San Pedro Sula is the murder capital of the world. In fact, according to the Mexican government last year, in the year before, San Pedro Sula was actually the 26th most deadly city in the Americas. By way of comparison, my home city of Baltimore, Maryland, is number 21. And St. Louis, Missouri is number 13. So this is one of those phrases that gets used over and over again, but it's not really true. In any event, a fear of crime really doesn't constitute persecution. Crime affects us all. And notwithstanding the fact that, governments don't have effective efforts to respond to crime, does not mean that their population actually has a persecution claim or a cognizable, credible fear claim. The other issue that is involved in this is that, notwithstanding the fact that the statute doesn't include it, asylum officers also consider whether these individuals have a credible fear of torture. So basically, if they argue that they have any fear of harm at all or they've been harmed in the past, their cases get referred over to immigration judges to make the determination as to whether that harm meets the torture standard, which is by or at the instigation of or with the consent or acquiescence of a government official or person acting in an official capacity. The vast majority of these claims involve either individual actors or alternatively gang members, and there is no information available that would suggest that either Honduras, Guatemala, or El Salvador, from which the vast majority of these individuals come, actually that the governments of those countries actually acquiesce in any way to the activities of common criminals or gang members. In fact, these countries have been locked in a battle with gangs for years, but it still has to get to that level because asylum officers don't have the ability to make torture determinations. So those cases get moved down the line as well. But basically, long story short, most of the claims that we hear are individuals who fear crime, and that's certainly understandable. Again, I live in Baltimore, Maryland. I understand crime better than anybody. Tuesday, 2 weeks ago, we had 5 separate shootings, 9 people shot, 3 killed, just in one day. But that doesn't mean that the people of Baltimore have asylum claims and can all move to Canada. So, again, I'm sympathetic to the situation that they're in, but it really is an issue for the governments of these countries to resolve, not for the United States to accept in large numbers of individuals who've been the victims of crime.
Art, I want to also have you comment on another piece of news that took place as long as this group was moving towards our border. I don't know if you prefer the term caravan or you think another one's more appropriate. If you do think there's a better word for it, go ahead and use it. But that Mexico offered some sort of asylum or refugee status to these folks, and they declined it. What exactly did Mexico offer, and what reason do we know of that it was declined?
Mexico is a country that actually grants asylum, and for what it's worth, their asylum standard is much more liberal than ours is, because it would actually include claims like this of individuals who were, fleeing generalized strife or, disorder. They're an asylum-granting country. So is Guatemala, the country through which the Hondurans from San Pedro Sula passed. which would suggest to me or indicate to me that, in fact, these individuals don't actually have valid asylum claims, but rather are simply seeking a better life in the United States. That's understandable. I have no qualms with individuals who are seeking to improve their lot in life. But I go back to what Barbara Jordan said more than 20 years ago, and she talked about how unchecked immigration affects the most disadvantaged members of our society, those with poor education. Again, I refer back to my home city of Baltimore, those individuals who have not had the same employment opportunities that you and I and most of your listeners have had. Those are the individuals with whom these people in the caravan are going to be competing for jobs. It's going to drive down wages. It's going to drive down. It's going to, lessen the working conditions under which our own disadvantaged Americans, and that includes not just United States citizens, but also aliens who are already here, will have available to them. It'll probably, make it cheaper for us to buy food at the supermarket, or cheaper for us to have our lawns cut, or cheaper for us to engage in any number of things in our day-to-day lives. But the people who are going to pay the cost are the people who are least able to pay it, and that is the most disadvantaged in our own society.
Very quickly, Art, before we let you go, how well are we prepared, manpower-wise and otherwise, to handle this large of a group coming to the border?
Well, we have about 18,900 Border Patrol agents. Now, keep in mind, they only work 8-hour shifts, and, they work 40-hour weeks. So, we at any given time, we have only some proportion of those Border Patrol agents available. But, we are pretty well prepared. In addition, Secretary of Defense James Mattis has ordered U.S. military to the border area. They can't enforce border laws under the Posse Comitatus law, but they do have the ability to provide logistical support, as the National Guard has been doing in the past. So we're pretty well able to process them. The only issue is we're not really able to detain them, and detention is critical. But as I noted, under the law, our ability to detain families is going to be very limited, and there are a large number of families that are part of this caravan. So the fact is, at the end of the day, unless something changes the law, most of these folks are going to end up getting released, and they'll get exactly what they wanted when they left their hometowns.
Art, we'll have to leave it there. I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk again once this group gets closer and closer to the border and perhaps gets in. Thanks so much for being with us. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Andrew Arthur is Resident Fellow in Law and Policy at the Center for Immigration Studies. I'm Greg Columbus reporting for Radio America.